The Rebbe began to Farbrengen this afternoon that today, the day of Shabbos, has a shaykhis to Yud Beis Tammuz, which was in the middle of this week. And as Chassidus explains, based on the pasuk, Vayechulu hashamayim va'oretz v'chol tzavam, that everything which transpired during the week has an elevation on Shabbos, and a kiloyan on Shabbos. In other words, on Shabbos these things reach to a yet higher madrege. So the same would apply to the Indian of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, the Yontef of the Chag Agula, the Friedrich Rebbe, which was this week. All this has an elevation on the day of Shabbos. The Rebbe went on, he said that mainly during the Farbrengen, which was Tuesday night, it was stressed the idea that Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz is the day that the Friedrich Rebbe was liberated from prison. However, there's another thing which has to do with Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, and he said it was mentioned very briefly in the Farbrengen, and that is the fact that Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz is Yud Beis Tammuz is the birthday of the Friedrich Rebbe. And the emes is, the Rebbe went on that the Friedrich Rebbe was the one that introduced the entire idea of celebrating a birthday by Chassidim. This was totally unknown till the Friedrich Rebbe introduced it. As it's told in the Siches, that based on the Yerushalmi, that the Yerushalmi tells us that on a Yom Haledas, on a birthday, Mazloi shel Adam goiver, that is when his mazel strengthens. In other words, a person gets a chizuk, a special chizuk on the day of his Yom Haledas. So actually, till the Friedrich Rebbe spoke about this inyan and it was printed in the Sichas of the Friedrich Rebbe, the whole inyan of celebrating a Yom Haledas by Chassidim was totally strange. It was unknown. So it was the Friedrich Rebbe that introduced it. So the Rebbe said, if so, when we're talking of Farbrengen, which deals with Yud Beis Tammuz, so we shouldn't forget to mention the fact that Yud Beis Tammuz is also the birthday of the Friedrich Rebbe. Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe went on, was a leader of Chabad. Together with Chabad, we know that there's another title for the movement, which is known as Lubavitch. Chabad Lubavitch. Where does the name Lubavitch originate from? The Rebbe says this is something which is even known. Not only Jews know it, even Goyim as well know it also. It's written about it Barichos in the Sefer Zechonis, in the memoirs of the Friedrich Rebbe, that when the city of Lubavitch, the small shtetl of Lubavitch, was founded, it's composed of two words. The word Luba means love in Russian. So we see that what's the idea of the whole movement, the whole idea of Lubavitch is to extend love, to extend Avas Yisrael, to further this idea and bring about the entire idea of Ahava, of love. And this goes to such an extent that it's even spelled out and expressed in the name of the city, which tells us about the entire movement. And the Rebbe says we know how much this was so in the actions of the Friedrich Rebbe. Particularly the Friedrich Rebbe is known for his great Ahavas Yisrael. And this year, Yud Beis Tammuz marks the 102nd birthday of the Friedrich Rebbe. In other words, we're going into the 102nd year. We're going into Kapitel Kuf Beis of the Friedrich Rebbe, since he was born in the year Tov Reish Mem. The Rebbe tied in many inyanim that in Kabbalah it's explained, in Chassidus and in Kabbalah, that word of Kuf Beis, Kav, is explained with a lot of chashivas, strength given to this word of Kuf Beis, to the meaning of Kuf Beis. Then the Rebbe went on, if so, the Rebbe said, if we're looking what inyonim we have to talk in today's Farbrengen, it's most appropriate to talk about these inyonim that have a shaykhus to Yud Beis Tammuz. Either have a shaykhus to Yud Beis Tammuz, or inyonim, at least at first should be discussed, inyonim which we missed out on Yud Beis Tammuz. So firstly, the Rebbe spoke about this inyan which we just spoke about, the birthday of the Friedrich Rebbe, which is also Yud Beis Tammuz, which is also an inyan that has an obvious shaykhus to Yud Beis Tammuz. Then the Rebbe spoke a sicha, went on, behemshich to what he spoke in the Farbrengen of Yud Beis Tammuz. In the Farbrengen of Yud Beis Tammuz, the Rebbe made a siyum, he made a hadron, a Masechta Tomid. A Masechta Tomid, small Masechta, which tells us about the Beis HaMikdash, details about the Beis HaMikdash, and at the very end the Masechta tells us which shir was sung daily in the Beis HaMikdash. In fact, what we say the Yom every day, Hayom Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, and so forth, this stems from the shir which was sung on this given day in the Beis HaMikdash. So for example, what we say on Yom Rishon, this is what was sung on Yom Rishon in the Beis HaMikdash, and so forth. So the Mishnah in Tamid, the very end of Masechta Tamid, tells us which shirim was said on every single day of the entire week. Then the Mishnah comes, what shir was said on Shabbos? Mishnah says, on Shabbos they said, Mizmer shir l'yoyim ha-Shabbos, which we also say, l'yoyim shekuloi Shabbos ha-menucha l'chayelam. In other words, Pashat Pshat in this Gemara would be, in the Mishnah, that on Shabbos we say, a Mizmer which talks about Shabbos, not only does it talk about Shabbos, but mainly it stresses the Yom Shekuloi Shabbos. In other words, when Mashiach will come, that period we refer to as a time that the entire period will be referred to as a time of Shabbos. So we see that there's a difference between the song that was sang in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos as opposed to the song which was sang on the rest of the days. What's the difference? As the Gemara explains, the same Gemara is in Rosh Hashanah also. As the Gemara explains it, the psukim which we say on every day of the week have some sort of a relation, some sort of a contact to the thing which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created on that given day. For example, Sunday has some sort of a shaykhus to what was created on Sunday, Monday, and so forth. Straight down the entire week. However, what we say on Shabbos we say, Mizmer shir l'yoyim ha-Shabbos, we stress l'yoyim shekuloi Shabbos. So it comes out that the shir which we say on Shabbos is a shir that does not deal with Shabbos in the past, but it deals the way Shabbos would be in the future. In other words, it deals with the time when Mashiach will come, l'yoyim shekuloi Shabbos. So there's an obvious difference between the way the shir that it's said on Shabbos as opposed to the other shirim which are said in the Beis HaMikdash and the rest of the week. So the Rebbe asked in Beis Tammuz, and he spoke about it today as well, that it requires a big explanation why Take did the Chachamim make such a difference between the shir that said on Shabbos as to the shir that said the entire week. And in fact, the Rebbe spoke today that the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, which brings the same Gemara as the Gemara in the end of Tamid, there the Gemara asks it. Amar Rab Nechemya. Rab Nechemya asks, Ma ro Chachamim, or as another version would be, Ma ro Rab Akiva l'chalek ben aprokim alol. Where Taka did the Chachamim get their ground to divide and make a difference that the shir of the entire week would be talking about inyonim that took place, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu created on that day, and has a shaykhus to that day from past view. However, the shir which we say on Shabbos has a shaykhus to Shabbos from the day to come, from the osid, from the future. In fact, the Rebbe explained it Beis Tammuz. The Rebbe explained that the whole idea of saying is shir, that's an idea of singing a song in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara tells us, when were these songs sang? When the Yidden were makriv korbanos. And not stand when they brought a korban, but the Gemara tells us in oimrim shira el ala yayin. In other words, there has to be some sort of a tangible simcha, some real simcha the Yidden have to have. In other words, shira comes, when does one sing? It comes as a result of real inner joy, of inner happiness. This brings about his singing. Memela, if the Yidden had to sing a daily song in the Beis HaMikdash, it also came, they had to perform something which created and brought him into a mood of happiness, and Memela they sang this song, whatever song would be on any given day. So Gemara gives us a klal, in oimrim shira el ala yayin. Shira is recited only when the wine was poured in the Beis HaMikdash. We know that there was a pouring of wine together with every kolm. Wine is an inyan that's misameach elakim va'anoshim. Wine brings about simcha, brings about joy. Memela elevated the spirits of the Yidden that were makriv the kolm, the Koyanim, the Leviim, the Yisraelim, whoever took part in this kolm. Memela, this brought about a singing. So Memela, if we say that there's a simcha of inyanim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu already gave us, we're happy with the creation, we're happy with whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu created on every given day, we can understand how this can bring about a simcha. But the Rebbe continues, what shayach is simcha, what shayach is shira, that we say we're celebrating and we're singing, and it's an inyan of shira that we're going to have a yom shekuloi Shabbos hamnucha. Naturally, we are waiting strongly most eagerly the coming of Mashiach, but at the same time, if it's something we don't have it yet, we don't have it in front of us, it's not an inyan of Simcha, which we physically have, how can this bring about the saying of Shir? So the Rebbe explained Yud Beis Tammuz, and explained more about it today, that the difference between the Shir of Shabbos and the Shir which was said in the Beis HaMikdash on the other days of the week is as follows. The Shir of every day of the week talks about the past only. Talks about the past. We say every day something appropriate to that given day. Sunday on Sunday, Monday, and so forth, straight out the entire week. The Shir that we say on Shabbos has two inyan. It doesn't mean that it has nothing to do with the past tense of Shabbos. Naturally, just like we express something about every day of the week, we know very well what the Medrash tells us, that when Shabbos came, Shabbos also created something. The Medrash says there was a lack of rest, the concept of rest wasn't in existence yet, but Shabbos, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Shabbos, this introduced the concept of rest, because for 6 days HaKadosh Baruch Hu, 6 days HaKadosh Baruch Hu was working, creating the entire world. Then it came to the day of Shabbos, he created an inyan of Menucha. So when we say the Shir, which we recite on Shabbos, which is Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, so automatically the Rebbe says, as soon as we say Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, so we're automatically stressing that this is a Shir that has to do with Shabbos. Shabbos as Shabbos stands now. And if we look into the contents, what we say Oidin Nuvum B'Seiva D'Sheinim V'Rananim Yiyu. It's all in Yonim that deal with the idea of Menucha. It's all the contents of the Perek also has in Yonim that show us what Shabbos stands for. Together with this, Shabbos has something additional, that is something special in the Shir of Shabbos, that not only does it talk about something of the past, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created on Shabbos, which is the idea of rest, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu created other things on the other days of the week. This Shir has something special to it. It has something that reminds us also on the Yom Shekul Shabbos. It also talks about the period of Shabbos, which we mean the period of coming of Mashiach, which that is the period to come. However, when we're saying the Shir, Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, which we were saying in the Beis HaMikdash, on Shabbos, not only the Rebbe is learning Pshat, did it deal with the Shabbos to come, meaning the Yom Shekulei Shabbos, the Tkufa, the period of the coming of Mashiach, but it also applies to Shabbos as a day, just like the other 6 days of the week, it applies to the day of Shabbos as well. This is how the Rebbe is learning Pshat in the seam of Masechta Rosh Hashanah, of Masechta Tamid, which is a Gemara which is also brought in Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe said that an explanation of the contents of every Shir to each day we find in Rashi. The Rebbe said in the Farbrengen, when he said Tuesday night, he said it's found in Rashi, but he didn't say where in Rashi. So the truth is, the Rebbe says that on Masechta Tamid, the commentary that's around the Gemara is not from Rashi. Some may think it's Rashi, but it's really not. And in fact, he says it's a commentary from some Rishon which was printed. But Rashi did not write a commentary on Masechta Tamid. So if we want to know how Rashi explains the shaykhs of every Yom to its day when it is recited, we have to look into Rashi in Rosh Hashanah. Rashi in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Lamed Aleph. This is where Rashi explains exactly the shaykhs of the Shir Shel Yom, which is as well the same Shir which was sung in the Beis HaMikdash by the Leviim, to any day, to its given day. The Rebbe says that there's the Shem HaGdolim from the Chidah, who tells us a lot of historic facts. So he says if one wants to really make sure, he says one wants to argue and debate, maybe the commentary on Talmud is as well from Rashi. So he says we have in the Shem HaGdolim, the Chidah, which was written by the Chidah, he tells us many historic things, and he also tells us that the commentary on Talmud is takanat from Rashi. And in fact, he says in all the Shas Gemaras where it was entered and it's printed as a commentary on Masechta Tamid, nowhere is it mentioned that there is a Rashi. Just it's a commentary on Talmud which was found suitable to interpret Masechta Tamid. That's why they put it in with the Gemara of Talmud. However, Rashi never wrote a Pirush on Masechta Tamid, it seems. So if we want to have the explanation of the shaykhs of every Yom to its day, we find it Taka in Rashi, but where Rashi in Masechta Rosh Hashanah? Says the Rebbe went on explaining in Ruchni is the idea based on the vote of the Baal Shem The Baal Shem Tov tells us that the Mokim Shertzoni Shalodam Shamhu Nimtza, that where a person's desire is, that is where he really is. A person can transform himself and bring himself into a spiritual sense to whatever inyan his desire is. The main goal of a Yid has to be to this Tkufa of L'Yom Shekulei Shabbos. We have to see to it, to bring ourselves and all our meisim into what kind of a period, into the period of the coming of Mashiach, the Yom Shekulei Shabbos. Not that we should, the Rebbe went on, not that we should be involved totally in Gashmias, and our entire koch should be in the Yonei Olam. And here the Rebbe referred to it, there's a story from the Rebbe Nishmaseiden, from the Rebbe Rashab. Rebbe Rashab had a very bright chassid, who was very learned and a big chassid of his. And this chassid went into a kalash's business, into a rubber business of rubbers. And the Rebbe Nishmaseiden was really not satisfied with him being in such type of a business. It wasn't really fitting for this person, type of person this was, that he should be in a business of selling rubbers or manufacturing rubbers. The Rebbe Nishmaseiden expressed himself. He says that he already saw feet in kalashas, but he never saw a head in kalashas. Meaning that this person put his entire head and his entire effort and everything into the kalashas. The Rebbe said, the same applies, the lesson which we are to take from this, that when it comes to Inyanei Olam, to Inyanim Gashmiyim, not to be fakocht in it fully. And the Rebbe described at length, he says that there are many people, many merchants, that as soon as an idea of business comes into their mind, may even be late at night, the Rebbe says, and they have to make a contact with people in other parts of the world. And in other parts of the world, it's yet later at night. And being that this person thinks that he may be successful in making a deal, he doesn't hold himself back. He doesn't think twice about spending Yiddish Geld, and he runs to the phone and wakes up the other person, the other part of the world, and wakes him up with an idea. He has a thought. Maybe we can make money on some sort of an idea. And then the Rebbe says at the end, it doesn't even let itself out to be something basic. Why? Because one is so fakocht in the idea of making money, he doesn't even think twice. Gets an idea, let it be middle of the night, in the middle of the day, he runs, he makes overseas calls. To show and to be fully involved in the Inyanim of Gashmias. And this is something which is extremely not wanted. The idea is that our goal has to be, and our minds have to be into the concept of L'Yom Shekulei Shabbos. We have to transform ourselves into a tkufa, bring ourselves into a tkufa of Yom Shekulei Shabbos. Rabbi said we find on the other end, we find the contrary. We find how kalashes can also be nizbara, can also be purified. So there's a famous story from the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe related on behalf of his father that when it comes to Chazarah, he said the malachim l'mayla find torn shoes and ripped shoes, soles and heels from shoes. So the malachim l'mayla, not having anything to do with Gashmias, asked how do pantofel would mean shoes in Yiddish, how do pantofel come into Gan Eden? And it was explained to them that this is what the Yidden celebrate Simchas Torah. And Yidden dance with so much joy on Simchas Torah that one loses a heel, one tears a shoe, and so forth. And all this comes up Lamaila, and Lamaila, this is extremely treasured by the Eibishter. The Rebbe says here we see how we can do the contrary. Not putting one's head into kalashes, but to take kalashes and bring it up to the head. A spiritual sense. In other words, take in Yonei Olam, take Na'alayim, pantofel as the expression goes in Yiddish, and be it mevara that pantofel should be found in Gan Eden. And the Rebbe went on, he says that we know, it's stressed all over, that Shabbos has a shayches to the complete week. However, it's explained also in Sfarim that Shabbos has a shayches not only to the complete week, but to the Shabbos, to the last Shabbos, to the Shabbos that passed. In other words, today's Shabbos has a shayches to Shabbos of a week ago. What's Shabbos a week ago was the day of Tes Tammuz, 9 days in the month of Tammuz. Rebbe says today, if we want to know what took place on various days, one doesn't have to be a genius. There's a sefer which is called Dvar Yom B'Yomai, similar svarim, but the Dvar Yom B'Yomai is a collection. It tells us, goes according to the calendar, and every single day, whatever took place in Jewish history on that day. So the Dvar Yom B'Yomai tells us that on the 9th day of Tammuz, this is when Hufko Achoima, that is when the wall surrounding Yerushalayim, that's when the enemy broke in and split the wall and broke open the wall surrounding Yerushalayim. So the question actually arises, we know that we express it on the 17th of Tammuz, which is tomorrow, which is a fast day. We fast on the 17th of Tammuz, not on the 9th of Tammuz. Rabbi brought out the various Pirushim. There are some that claim that in the first Beis HaMikdash it was on the 9th of Tammuz, a week ago Shabbos. And the second Beis HaMikdash it was on the 17th of Tammuz, tomorrow, tonight, which is tonight. Others claim, and being that the churban of the second Beis HaMikdash is something which we feel more than the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, so that's why when it comes to us fasting on the day when the wall around Yerushalayim was broken into, we fast on the 17th of Tammuz. There are others that claim that this is not so. The Rebbe said, actually it's a machlokes in Metzius. If according to those that claim that they don't accept it, the teretz that the 9th was for the first Beis HaMikdash and the 17th in Tammuz was for the second Beis HaMikdash. But they claim that both days apply to the second Beis HaMikdash. How could it be? I mean, either or. In Metzius, if it's Metzius meaning in actuality, it's something which physically took place. It either had to happen on the 9th of Tammuz or it had to happen on the 17th of Tammuz. So the Rebbe explained, if we find something similar to this, we find by the Mabul. Mabul Chumash. We find by the Mabul that first the pasuk expresses itself that a Geshem began. A rain. Then there's a pasuk that this Geshem turned into a Mabul. So Rashi comments, what's the pshat? Initially, HaKadosh Baruch Hu thought perhaps only a Geshem would be sufficient. And this Geshem would be even turned into Gishmei Bracha, would be turned into rains of blessing. However, when he saw that the people in Noach's generation did not do tshuva, and did not realize that this is coming as a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taki capable and will bring a Mabul on the world and destroy them, that is when the Rebbe brought it into a Mabul. So we see that something could begin in a format that when it begins, it can even be turned out to bracha, and once it finalizes, that's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking the situation into consideration. If he has to turn it into an Indian of a penalty, of some sort of a punishment, that's how he does it, like we find by the Mabul. So the Rebbe says we'll have to learn the same pshat in the idea of the 9th of Tammuz and the 17th of Tammuz as well. It began when? On the 9th of Tammuz. On the 9th of Tammuz, that's when they broke open a little bit of the wall. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Yidden a chance. And it was a period for another 10 days. 9 days, 10 days. Whatever, till the 17th of Tammuz. Once HaKadosh Baruch Hu realized that by the 17th of Tammuz, Yidden still were not worthwhile of remaining in Eretz Yisrael and remaining with the Beis HaMikdash, that is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about the 17th of Tammuz. And on the 17th of Tammuz, the Rebbe went on to explain, if it would have remained in a situation as the breaking of the wall was, only on that part of the breaking which they accomplished only on the 9th of Tammuz, Adarab, it would have been an assistance for the Yidden, it would have made the Yidden easier to drive out the enemy out of Yerushalayim. However, once it came to the 17th of Tammuz, HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw that the Yidden weren't worthwhile, that is when the entire wall was broken, and that is why we cannot fast on the 9th of Tammuz, because the 9th of Tammuz, the entire wall wasn't broken yet. When do we fast? On tomorrow, which is the 17th of Tammuz. And the Rebbe concluded, he said, it's Shabbos afternoon, it's only a half a day before the coming of the 17th of Tammuz. He says, and Jewish children are still singing, we want Mashiach now. And in the sense of we want Mashiach now, Mashiach could even come now before Shavuos B'Tammuz. He says, the Gemara tells us that Mashiach cannot come on a Shabbos. He says, let's not be worried about that problem. Like the famous story goes from the Tzemach Tzedek, that I mentioned it last week as well, that Tzemach Tzedek once said he wished for the coming of Mashiach. So he was asked, we're talking in a time that the Gemara says that Ein ben David ba, Mashiach does not come in this time. So he says, being that the Gemara has an often expression of Teiku, that when Mashiach will come, Tishbi Yetaretz Kushis V'Abayis, Al Yanav, he'll answer all questions. So let him come, and we have the question, he will answer this question as well. But what we need is a real physical Mashiach. Mashiach Shetaka come. So the Rebbe says, we should hope for the coming of Mashiach till the 17th of Tammuz, and then we wouldn't have to fast Shabbos of Tammuz. And if not, Chas v'Shalom, then we constantly have to hope for the coming of Mashiach, that Mashiach should come. As we keep on stressing, we want Mashiach now. And then the Rebbe went on, as customary in the summer weeks, to learn a Mishnah, Masechta Avos. And this week's Perek is the 6th Perek. Perek that is called Kinyan Torah. The Rebbe said, Bechlal, the Ma'amorim from the Frierdiker Rebbe, which the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out for Yud Beis Tammuz, the Frierdiker Rebbe stresses very much the great achievements and accomplishments by learning Torah Berabbim. Not only one should sit and learn Torah, but many should learn Torah. And this idea is expressed in the Perek of Kinyan Torah as well. So Mamela, it's very appropriate, the Rebbe says, to learn a Mishnah that deals with the learning of Torah. Mishnah Tes in Perek Shishi, Perek of Kinyan Torah. Actually, the Mishnah relates an episode which took place. Amar Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma. Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma told us, Pam achas hayisi mahalach baderech. I once went in the way, was once walking. Upaga bi adam echad. And an individual person met him. V'nasan li shalom, the person gave me shalom. V'hichzarti lo shalom, and I gave him back shalom. Amali, so the man addressed me and he said, Rebbe, me'ezeh mokem ata? Amarti lo, so Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma says, I told him, me'ir g'doylo shel chachamim v'shel seifchem ani. I'm a resident in a big city. He asked me, where am I from? So he told him, I'm a resident in a big city that has a lot of Talmidei Chachamim, a lot of intelligent people. Amali, so he suggested to Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma, he told him, Rabbi, we are proposing, come and live with us, and we will reimburse you. We will reimburse you with thousands of dinarei zahav, of gold pieces, stones, and precious diamonds. Mishnah goes on, Amarti lo. Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma tells us he responded to this person, and he told him, if you will give me all the silver and gold and diamonds and jewels that exist in the world, I will not live only in a place of Torah. He rejected his offer. Quotes from Tehillim, that Torah is more precious to me, David said, than thousands of gold pieces and silver pieces. And he goes on, not only this, when a person leaves this world, nothing goes with him, only Torah and good deeds bilvad. And he quotes a pasuk, and then at the very end of the Mishnah he quotes another pasuk, it's that the Rebishter, who possesses all the gold and silver, so is possessed by Hashem. So we must say that Torah is something more precious than Kesef V'Zahav. Rebbe says if we look into this Mishnah, the Mishnah is full of questions. So we try to remember most of them. First of all, the Rebbe asked, for what need is it for Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma to give us this introduction? Pam achas hayisi mahalach bederech. Once I went bederech. He met somebody and this is what happened. What relevance is it to us that this story took place in a format that Pam achas hayisi mahalach bederech? Once he went on the way. Also the Rebbe asked, we know the Gemara tells us that it's a very big thing to be makdim shalom to people. If you meet somebody, tell him hello, tell him shalom. We see from this incident that Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma was not makdim shalom to the person. On the contrary, that person nosan li shalom. He gave shalom first to Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma. Then Rabbi Yosi responded, Hichzarti lo shalom. Rabbi asked, why? Talking about an individual like Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma, he should have feared himself all the way lefnim mishuras adin. Milat the Chasidus, the Gemara tells us how important it is to greet one with shalom. Why didn't he do that? Naturally, if one greets shalom, we're supposed to respond. If one greets greets you shalom, and we don't respond, the Gemara says you consider the gazlan, the thief. Then the Rebbe said, if we look carefully into the Mishnah, he already told him that he's rejecting his offer. He wouldn't accept it. What does he have to bring a raya from Tillim? Fine, he told him that Torah is very dear.
He asked about Im Titinli Kol Kesef, it was like Bilam's answer.
Good. Rebbe said, he already turned him down, and he said that money has no value to him in comparison to Torah, that he should leave a city that has a Torah environment. So he comes to Tillim and brings him a raya, v'chein kosev b'sefer Tillim. Sure, Sefer Tillim. Then he adds the words, who edited Tillim? David Melech Yisrael. What importance is it in this Mishnah to mention that Tillim was composed by David Melech Yisrael? I mean, Mishnah here isn't telling us who edited Tillim. Remember, he wants to quote from Tillim, fine. V'chein kosev b'sefer Tillim, tovli teiras picha malfi zav v'kesef. Rabbi said that this response actually reminds on the response which we find by Bilam to Balak. Bilam told Balak, if you're giving me Meloi Beisi, a full house of Kesef V'Zav, he cannot go against the word of Hashem. He also used this type of an expression. Here we see he's going further than that. Not only a full house, he told him he will give him tens of thousands of dinrei zahav. And he's telling him, if you're going to give me all the gold and silver that's existing in the world, I wouldn't accept your offer to leave an environment of Torah. So we see that he suggested to him, Elef alofim dinrei zahav. In the response of Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, he's also adding the word of kesef, gold, silver as well. Kesef, zahav, avanim tevis, amargali, shebe oilam, in the entire world. Didn't say anything, most valuable things wouldn't convince me, Rabbi Yossi says, to leave an environment of Torah. As he quotes from Tillim. And the Rabbi asks, what's the pshat that he's adding on, v'loyoid, that when a person passes away from this world, naturally, I mean, which fool thinks that a person after 120 years goes with gold and silver? I mean, anybody sensible knows that this is something which after 120 kesef, ezav, and avanim tevis and margolius don't go along with a person. So the great Tanna, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, in his response, that he's giving the person, that he's rejecting his offer, and he wouldn't leave an environment of Torah, is also adding on what? That you should know that when a person passes away, money has no value. Naturally. I mean, this is something which people that were not in the caliber of Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma also understood that Gashmi is the Kesef, Ezav, Avanim Tevis, and Margolius has no value after 120. Rebbe went on to explain, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma met this person, and the Mishnah uses the expression Poga bi Adam Echad. What's the pshat Poga? There are various expressions how we can say we met a person. The Mishnah uses the expression Poga. What's the pshat Poga? Rebbe says Poga is an expression that's used in sense of damage, in sense of a mazik. In other words, this person wanted to hurt Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma. He immediately saw that this person's attitude was one that he wanted to hurt him. Why did he want to hurt him? Because this person wanted to take him away from an environment of Torah. So if this person is approaching Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma with an offer to leave Torah, he's really out to harm Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma. So that is why, as the Rebbe is learning, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma did not give shalom to a person that's Poga boy, to a person that's trying to harm him. He doesn't go and give shalom. However, if this person gave him shalom, naturally he responded him. That far he didn't go, because if one gives shalom and you don't answer him, it's an inyan of gzela. So once it was not only shalom, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma had no alternative. He had to give him back shalom. Because it was only one time Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, as we see from the Mishnah, his inyan was learning Torah. Remember, it was very rare for Rabbi Yossi to travel, to be out on the outskirts. to be a mahalach baderech. But this was a one and only a paramachas. And this person approached him and he told him, I will give you elef alofim din rezav v'avonim tevis amargolius. So what's the pshat? He will give him elef alofim din rezav. So the Rebbe is learning, he will give him an enormous amount of wealth, so he'll be able to support yeshivas. He'll be able to support tzedakah, chesed. He'll be able to accomplish tremendous acts of charity with all the money which he's going to be getting from which Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma is going to be getting from this individual. Isn't it something tremendous? He's going to be able to fulfill a tremendous ratzon of Hashem, giving tzedakah, supporting yeshivas, maintaining yeshivas, which is something which is extremely valuable. So this person is telling him, no. To me, Rabbi Yossi says, this has no value. Not only if you're going to give me elef alofim din rezav, but if you're going theoretically going to be in a position of making all the money in the world and belong to me, Rabbi Yossi says, this also wouldn't convince me to leave Torah. And with all the money in the world, he would definitely be able to support an enormous amount of yeshivas. He would be able to give a tremendous amount of tzedakah. Still, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma says, learning Torah tops everything.
The Rebbe said the entire world will need to come to him for tzedakah.
That's right. He will own all the money of the entire world. Memela, the entire world will have to come on to him for tzedakah. So we can imagine what type of a position he'd be in and doing mitzvahs Hashem. So he says no. He's turning all this down because he doesn't want to forsake the learning of Torah. V'chein kasav b'sefer Tehillim. What does he quote from Tehillim? Because David HaMelech said, Toiv li Torah spicha ma'alfei zahav v'kesef. So Emes says, one may say, how can he compare himself to David HaMelech? David HaMelech was David Melech Yisrael Chai v'Kayim. He was a Melech, no one can compare himself to him. However, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, who is telling us this episode because he wants that we shall derive a lesson from it as well and follow in his footsteps. How can we go and compare ourselves to David HaMelech, who recited Toiv l'Teiras Picha Malfi Zav v'Kesef? So that's why he's stressing V'chein Kosav b'Sefer Tehillim al yidei David Melech Yisrael. We know, the Gemara tells us, that who composed Tehillim? Ne'im Zemiros Yisrael. That's the title the Gemara uses for David HaMelech. He was the composer of Zemiros Yisrael. So and Tehillim is said by each and every Yid. We all say Tehillim. So it means that these inyanim which David HaMelech put into Tehillim is not inyanim which David HaMelech, which were exceptions only for the life of David HaMelech. These are inyanim which are for all of us to follow, which David HaMelech tells us how we Yid and how to fear sich. Memela, David HaMelech here is telling us we should know Toivli Teiras Picha Ma'alfei Zahav v'Kesef. So the Rebbe explained at length that we know that Torah tells us that a melech is lo yarba lo susim. A melech al pi Torah is not allowed to have a lot of horses, as well as he's not allowed to have much kesef v'zahav. Paskim explained, Rambam explains that only what is needed for his kingdom, and a melech naturally is supposed to have a lot of wealth for his kingdom. Whatever is needed for his kingdom, naturally he's allowed to possess. This the Torah doesn't say he shouldn't have. So Memela, David HaMelech is saying, Toivli Torah spicha ma'alfei zahav v'kesef. Torah is more dear to him than all the zahav v'kesef which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given him. And he needs it, and he had it in David HaMelech as a king. For his kingdom, definitely as a ruler, as a melech, needed an enormous amount of wealth. So he says that Torah of Hashem, Torah Spicha, has no comparison to the wealth which he possesses. So Memela, this is what Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma is responding to this person, that Torah is above everything. And he brings the raya from David HaMelech. Then he goes on, V'lo yoid. Ela shebishas p'tirosei shel adam, ein melavan lo la'adam, lo kesef, lo zav, lo avanim tovos ha'margoliyos, Ela Torah ma'asam tovim bilvad. Rabbi is learning, the diuk is a milavin lo la'adam. What's milavin? Milavin stems from the word lavaya. It's just like now, lavaya is, one passes away, there's the procession of following the lavaya. This is the same which Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma is referring to. And he says, though there are other mitzvahs which a person performs, and other mitzvahs, there are mitzvahs which we have to come on to Kesef V'Zov to fulfill these mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs which we cannot achieve the mitzvahs unless we buy these mitzvahs, unless we go about and spend money to get these mitzvahs. So he says, although these mitzvahs are extremely important, still Torah taps them all. And the Rebbe is learning the Maisim Tovim which come as a result of Torah. In other words, Torah brings the person to Maisim Tovim as well. What do we see from this Mishnah? From this Mishnah we see the Rebbe goes on. The Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma stresses how the learning of Torah taps everything. There is nothing more important than learning Torah. Even one can bring himself into a position how will be able to support an enormous amount of tzedakah and yeshivas and meises HaTorah. If this will take him away from the environment of Torah, if this will reduce his learning of Torah, this is what Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma is telling us that one shouldn't do. Abba said we always learn others, so he always ties it in. We find other sayings from this Tana that have a shaykhs to this Mishnah. So the Rebbe, so we find the Gemara in Shabbos. Gemara tells us in Shabbos that Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said that 2 feet is better than 3. That's what he said. What's the pshat over there? Pshat in that Gemara is that when a person is strong enough and he walks on both legs, it's better that when he has to come on to a third leg, meaning a cane to assist him. That's the pshat of pshat in the Gemara. It's better a person should be able to walk on his own feet than have to come on to outside help. To help. The Rebbe is learning pshat in this Gemara that what Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma is really talking about is about the learning of Torah. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma says the best a person could do is really get himself involved into the learning of Torah. He's stressing the greatness of Torah. The Rebbe tied this to a story of the Tzemach Tzedek. As a mindset of the Tzemach Tzedek, that when the Tzemach Tzedek was young, the Alter Rebbe, who was his grandfather, wanted to give him a gift, a present. He wanted to give him a present, understanding of Torah. It's a tremendous spiritual gift he wanted to give him. He wanted to give him that he will be able to understand Torah in a very, very high level. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, no Zayda, I don't want this. Why? I want to achieve Torah on my own. He doesn't want Torah in the format of a gift. He wants to be a Yogaito Matzasa. He wants a Harav in Torah, and by Haraving in Torah, that's how he will reach Torah. In other words, this is the type of level in Torah Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma here is talking about as well. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma here is talking about a person, though we know that a person, Mara tells us that there's one reaches higher madrigas in learning through his Talmidim, one reaches through his Rebbe, Sagdei Rabbi Sai, and Agdei Talmidai. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma is talking here about a yet higher madriga in learning. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma here is talking about the highest level in learning, how one really gets associated with Torah. And his main inyan is only Torah. As he concludes, Li HaKesef v'Li HaZov, no Mashem Tzedakos, that the Rebbe is the one that says, the Rebbe is the one that says, Li HaKesef v'Li HaZov, v'meila all of riches and wealth have no comparison when it comes to Torah Spicha, when it comes to the Torah of Hashem. The Rebbe says we find another interesting Gemara. He says, the Rebbe says, as far as he recalls, we don't find it by any other Tana. Find the Gemara in Avodah Zarah tells us, when Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma passed away, Gemara says, the Gedolei Roimi, the leaders of Rome, went after him, took part in his Levaya. Why is this? The Rebbe says, because, and he says, on no other Tana or Amoira do we find that he got such a great honor that even Gentiles, G'dei Le'Reimi, should realize his greatness and take part in his Levaya. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma was extremely, someone really extraordinary in learning. To such an extent that even G'dei Le'Reimi realized his greatness. And the Rebbe says, let us not fool ourselves. These G'dei Le'Reimi were no tzaddikim. Why? Because the Gemara tells us that on the way back of Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma's Levaya, they met Reb Chanina ben Tradian. And they saw Reb Chanina ben Tradian was sitting and learning. And under Roman leadership at that time, learning was prohibited, learning Torah. So they took Reb Chanina ben Tradian with them, And as the story goes on later, Rab Chanina ben Teradian was one of the Asarei Harugei Malchus, one of the 10 Tanoim which were killed by the Roman government. However, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma was such an outstanding scholar in learning, he was so great in Limud Torah, that even the Gdolei Raimi realized his greatness. And if they realized his greatness, to such an extent that they took part in his Levaya, which is something which is not found by no other Tanu Amar. Memela, the hero from this Mishnah is the greatness of Torah. How Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma keeps on stressing in the entire episode, which is told in extreme detail. All these details are important because from all these details we see how Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma keeps on stressing that there is nothing which has any comparison to Torah. Kapitel Chof Tes Pasik Yud Zayin Yud Ches, where the Torah here is talking about the korbanos which were brought on Sukkot. Comes to Bayom Hasheni, it comes to the second day of Sukkot. So the pasuk tells us what exactly had to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash. Parim b'nei Boka shnei Masa, Eilem shnoyim, Kvosem b'nei Shana, Arba asot mim. Then the pasuk goes on, pasuk Yudches, Umenchosam v'niskehem, La Parim, La Eilem v'la Kvosim, B'misperom kamishpat. So Rashi comments. Rashi says, Horei hachag ayin hein, that during the entire Yontif of Sukkot, 70 Purim were brought in the Beis Hamikdash as korbanos. Why 70? Keneged ayin umis. Again, ties us in with the 70 nations that exist in the world. Shemismatim v'hoilchim simon kli alahim, which they should be reduced. In the same way, the 70 korbanos were brought in a way of they were brought in a process of every day one less than each day with one less than the previous day, and altogether it gives us a total of 70 korbanos, 70 pub. Wait, Rashi goes on. Ubimei Hamikdash, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, hayu maginin aleim min hayisurim. These korbanos served as a protector for the goyim from yisurim. So the Rebbe asked several questions in this Rashi. So the child here is learning Chumash. We're talking about a Ben Chumash Lamikra who is learning Chumash and is learning about the korbanos which were brought on Sukkot. So Rashi is telling us, you know that on Sukkot you brought what kind of korbanos? There were certain korban porim, and this korban were brought 70 in total in the entire Yontif, but each day one less than the other. Why? It's a siman for the goyim that the goyim should be reduced. In the same Rashi, the very same Rashi, the other half of Rashi tells us that in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, the korbanos served as a protector to the goyim. So it's one Rashi, and this one Rashi is telling us actually two opposite things. On one hand, the korbanos were brought to decrease the goyim. On the other hand, the korbanos accomplished the protector for the goyim. Then Mr. Rebbe says, if we look carefully, this Rashi, there's a Gemara. Gemara tells us that in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, the korbanos were a protector, but what kind of protector? For rain. The goyim should have rain. Because the world can't exist without rain, so it rain to the world. Rashi doesn't say that here. And then Mr. Rebbe says, it's very appropriate, the idea that to bring Sukkot a korban on rain, because as the Mishnah tells us, that b'chag nidunin al hamayim. When was the din of mishpat by the Eibishter? When is the din of mishpat on water? This is on Sukkot. Memela, it's very appropriate, Sukkot, to do something which should bring to the waters. As we can see that when do we also mention Geshem in davening of Sukkot, in davening of Shemini Atzeres. So we see that the Yontif of Sukkot has a shaykhus to the waters, to a blessing on waters. However, Rashi, for some reason, doesn't mention it here. Rashi here doesn't mention the Gemara. Rashi mentions that it was a protector from Yisur. Where is the source of Rashi? The source of Rashi is, the Rebbe says, a medrash which is called Medrash Tache. What's the pshat Medrash Tache? The Rebbe says it's a medrash which has two names. One name for this medrash is, it's a medrash of Rav Pinchas ben Yair, because he was the one that was the author of this medrash. Another name as this medrash is referred to is with the word Tache. Tache is a word in Chumash Bereshis. Tache Yoretz Deshe. The first word of this medrash is with the word Tache. So that's why in Sfarim, this medrash is referred to with medrash as the medrash Tache. So Rashi brings us an inyan which is a medrash Tache. It's Tache a medrash, but to say that this has a shaychus to Pshuta Shel Mikra, it's really not understood. What is the shaychus here to Pshuta Shel Mikra? Furthermore, the Rebbe asks, if Rashi is coming to tell us the karbanos which were brought on Sukkot, and to give reason for these karbanos, where should Rashi tell this? Rashi should say the very first day of Sukkot, when we're told which karbanos had to be brought, Rashi should give us this interpretation. If Rashi doesn't give it the very first day of Sukkot, Rashi should give us where the pasuk is telling us about the karbanos which were brought on the last day of Sukkot. Rashi doesn't do neither. It comes to Bayom Hasheni, which is the second day of Sukkot. Here Rashi finds it appropriate to comment what kind of karbanos, give reason for the karbanos which were brought on Sukkot. Then if we look into the next Rashi, La Kvasim, Rashi says the Kvasim deals with Yisrael. Shenikru sepezura, vehem kvuyim. Yidden should remain, because through all the persecutions and tzaras which Yidden went through, Yidden always remained kavua. Uminyanam Tishin v'shmeina. This was a total of 98 karbanos, 98 kvasim during the entire yontif of Sukkot. Lechalis mehem Tishin v'shmeina klola shebemishna Torah. To take away the 98 klolas, 98 expressions of curse which we have in Chumash Dvarim. So as a takana to that, the Rebbe said to the Yidden to bring 98 kvasim during the yontif of Sukkot. The Rebbe says if the Rashi on Pasuk Yitches is explaining everything which was brought in this series of karbanos, let us look into Pasuk Yitches carefully. Pasuk says, "Umin chosam v'niskehem la parim la elim v'la kvasim b'misparam kamishpat." So Rashi gives reason why parim were brought on Sukkot, deals with the goyim. Rashi gives reason why kvasim were brought, it deals with the Yidden, 98, a total of 98 during the entire Yontif. There's another kind of korban which was brought, Eilim. Why doesn't Rashi mention, give us an explanation, an interpretation, why the Yidden brought Eilim Asukis? Parim Rashi explains, Kvasim Rashi explains, the middle one, Eilim, Rashi says nothing about. So Rebbe went on to explain, briefly the explanation is as follows. A child who's learning Chumash already knows that there are many inyanim in Torah that he doesn't understand the reason. In fact, we even know that those mitzvahs which the Rebbe did give us reason, it's not the real reason. There's real deeper reasons for it than our minds can grasp why we fulfill these mitzvahs. So Mamela, when the child sees that the Rebbe told us to be makriv certain korbanos on certain times, he knows that there's an idea of kolm. We learned about it in Chumash Vayikra already. A kolm accomplishes a reach nechayach l'Hashem. However, to get into detail, why did why did Hashem say parim? Why did Hashem say eilim or kvasim? The child isn't bothered by that, because he knows that there are many inyanim which the Rebbe is telling us to do, which we don't have no reason for it. However, a child knows, a person learning Chumash knows that there's an idea. By Yidden always mailam b'kodesh. If we did one today, we have to do two tomorrow. We did two today, we have to do three tomorrow. We always have to keep on going higher and higher. This we know something very basic all over in Torah. An idea that we constantly go higher. Here we find something completely different. We find something contradictory to this philosophy of mailam b'kodesh. We find something contradictory. We find something that we go down. Yesterday we were makriv so many behemoths, and now it comes the second day we are makriv less. So when does the child bothered with this question? When he learns of the kolm of the Yom Hasheni. Once he's learning the kolm of Yom Rishon, he has no problem yet. Avad the Rebbe said to be makriv this and this, fine. However, he's coming into the second day. Here he sees that when it comes to the amount of parim, which the Rebbe said to be makriv on the second day of Sukkot, it's one less than the amount of parim which Hashem said to bring in the Beis HaMikdash on the first day of Sukkot. Ibazai is troubled with this question. Why? So here is where Rashi has need to explain it. Because by the first day there's no need for explanation. However, it comes to the second day, the child is learning, he's confronted with a big shaila. What kind of inyan is this? Why is there something which is going down? So Rashi is telling us you should know. It's keneged ayin umis. Just like we want that the ayin umis should be mismat and v'holchim simin klila. However, we know that a kolm also has to accomplish something positive as well. A kolm always has to bring some sort of assistance, some sort of help. Memela, Rashi has to come on to the other half of the Rashi. On one hand, it does something simin kliyah l'goyim, but on the other hand, it also does. It serves as a protector. It protects the goyim in Yisur. Why doesn't Rashi want to get involved with the inyan of with rain, like the Gemara says? Because the child here that does not know yet that Sukkot has a special shaykhs to the inyan of Bechag Nidun and Alamayim. This is something when he will get older, he will learn that Sukkot has some special shaykhs to get blessings on water. However, now Rashi wants to give a general idea what could the Korban help the Goyim. So what could the Korban help the Goyim in a general view that the child who's learning Chumash should understand it? So Rashi is telling us you should know Megin and Aleim and Yisurim, that the Korban serves as a protector from Yisurim. And the Rebbe later answered the question why Rashi doesn't explain anything as far as Elim. Rashi explains what the Purim accomplished, what the Kvasim accomplished, and Rashi doesn't explain what the Elim accomplished. Rashi says the Elim, there were 2 Elim brought constantly. 2 Elim on every day of Sukkot. So the child knows already that an Ayil reminds us on Eila Shel Yitzchak. Yitzchak, when he served as a Korban, was supposed to go as a Korban, so that Ayil replaced Yitzchak, as we say in the Akedah daily. So this Ayil reminds us on the sacrifice of Yitzchak on Eila Shel Yitzchak. We're not explaining that Chazal tell us that there are 2 inyanim which deal with Eila Shel Yitzchak. A shofar is made out of a horn, out of an Ayil. So there's the shofar which was by Matan Torah, as well as the shofar which will be heard when Mashiach will come. So this Elim were brought to. Why? So Rebbe explained, being that these Korbanos here dealt with Goyim as well as with Yidden, Yitzchak had a shaykhs side to Goyim and side to Yidden. Yitzchak had 2 children. Yitzchak had an Esav and Yitzchak had a Yankov. Memela, when it comes to Elim, which stands for Eila Shel Yitzchak, it's very appropriate to be makrif to Elim, and it deals with the 2 inyanim that have a shaykhs to Yitzchak. The Rebbe explained, Eila Shel Yitzchak as far as Matan Torah, this is an inyan which the Rebbe gave Torah only to Yidden. Even the Zayim mitzvahs b'nei Noach, which Goyim are mechuyev to observe, this also comes, it's also channeled through the Yidden. Yidden have to see to it, it's the Yid's obligation, and through Matan Torah the Rebbe gave these Zayim mitzvahs b'nei Noach as well. However, once Mashiach will come, the entire world will be purified. It not only will have a shaykhs to Yidden, but v'amdu, it would purify and elevate, as Chassidus discusses, not only Yidden, but the entire world, the entire universe will become uplifted once Mashiach comes. Remember, this inyan of Elim, 2 Elim were brought. Both have a shaykhs to Yitzchak and to the descendants of Yitzchak. And descendants of Yitzchak are both Sayyidin and Saygoyim. The one Ayil has a shaykhs to Matan Torah that has a shaykhs to Yankiv only. However, the other Ayil, which comes which deals with the shofar Shel Yemei Mashiach, this has a shaykhs not only to Yankiv as a descendant of Yitzchak, but to the Bnei Esav as a descendant of Yitzchak as well. This is Kitzer, and the Rebbe explained the Rashi. Then the Rebbe spoke in Inyan Shel Maisa and Inyan Shel Payel. HaMaisa, who Aikas, the Rebbe always stresses, is Benegei the 3 weeks. Benegei the 3 weeks, which begin tonight, tomorrow. Rebbe asked and urged that it's very appropriate that everyone should have kviyas and taking part in the kviyus itim b'Torah that deals with inyanim that have a shaykhs to the Beis HaMikdash. Whether it would be in Tanakh and Yecheskel, these prakim that tell us about the detailed construction of the Beis HaMikdash, or to learn the Masechtes Tamid, Masechtes Midas, which has a shaykhs to the Beis HaMikdash, as well Rambam Hilchos Beis HaBchira, all in Yonim which have a shaykhs to Beis HaMikdash, it's extremely appropriate to learn these in Yonim in these days. As well also to give tzedakah, to give an additional amount of tzedakah, something which we haven't done before. To set aside a couple of cents for tzedakah every day of these 3 weeks. Of the 3 weeks, the vachadika days, it's naturally no problem to give tzedakah. As far as Shabbos is concerned, the Rebbe said, Shabbos we can fulfill tzedakah in, there are 2 alternatives. One alternative is by either inviting guests, and guests is considered like a tzedakah. If for some reason we cannot have guests, or there are no guests around, or we don't want a guest, or whatever, the Rebbe said, if the housewife doesn't want a guest, or the husband doesn't want a guest, or there are no guests around, whatever the reason may be, then we know already an eitzah from the Torah. The Torah has given us an eitzah of lechem mishnah, that we know that we can do something double on Friday, which should take the place of Shabbos as well. So in other words, we should give Friday an extra couple of cents of tzedakah to take place for the Shabbos dika tzedakah. As well, the Rebbe also urged, as in previous years, the Rebbe said, he urged strongly on the inyan of siyums, that during the 9 days we should take part and see to complete mesechtes, to make a siyum on gemaras of Shas. And these inyanim, as the Rebbe concluded, tzedakah and Torah, this is what the pasuk says, siyum ba mishpat tepada v'shaver b'tzedakah. Mishpat meaning Torah, as the Targum comments. That siyum will be redeemed. These are inyanim that would hasten to rush the coming of Mashiach, and it's very appropriate after in these days that deal with chum, to show inyanim that show our belief in the coming of Mashiach, how we hope for Mashiach and for the Beis HaMikdash, to express it by learning inyanim that have a shaykhs to the Beis HaMikdash, as well as the giving of tzedakah.
Almost in an opposite vein, where he explained that more down around what he Yosef Kisma, he says that he started the same introduction, he never left his state that he was talking about. He says, then he explained in terms of that stuff, of going out and teaching Torah in faraway places where they have no Torah. He says the Yosef Kisma should have been offered money. He should have done it for free. He was offered money, so the Kasha is, even with money he didn't want to. Why? Then he explained that. He said that was his personality. Some people have the personality.
Now, it will affect Yemei Mashiach. Not only will it affect Yemei Mashiach, it will also affect our midah, also the times of Trias HaMesim. And Trias HaMesim will be sped up, that it wouldn't take a period of 40 years from Mashiach's coming till Trias HaMesim, but it'll be coming right away. It'll be in a format of Achishena, in a format that will be rushed. Not, the Gemara says, Zochu, it'll be Achishena. Loi Zochu, Chaz v'Shalom. This Gemara talks about the coming of Mashiach. Because Mashiach, if Chaz v'Shalom, Yidden wouldn't be Zeich, it will be Be'ita. It will still have to be in its time. The Rebbe is using the same idea now, not only for the coming of Mashiach, it should be Achishena, it should be hastened, but also the steps that are coming afterwards. The Inyanim of Trias HaMesim should also be sped up. And Mela, that's how the beginning of the Seder is tied in with the end of the Seder. That by us reaching the level of Ahi B'Shalach Paroi, as Paroi Shiktarois Yid, in other words, we're breaking the clipper of Paroi. Paroi at one time was the person who was the strongest menaged, the strongest level, strongest fighter of godliness. So what we are doing is we are breaking Paroi. And Paroi himself is agreeing that the Yidden have to leave Mitzrayim. So this whole inyan is tied in together. So by doing this, what we accomplish is, as Targum Yunus Ben Azil says, that this has an effect midoyer on all generations, not only on the generations of now, but it also has an effect on the doyers that when Mashiach will come. Not only will Mashiach will come, but even on Al Midah Us, on the future world, meaning on Trias HaMesim, which will come after Mashiach's come.
Was it similar to the beginning being the Koach and the end is the Poah and the Technique?
The Rebbe uses these letters. The Rebbe uses how the beginning and the end of the Seder are connected. The Rebbe uses this approach at many Inyanim. He uses it in Mesechtes and Shas and Sedras. So the beginning, the vote is, it's the beginning, but it's not only the beginning. Being that this is the title of the Seder, it means that all the Inyanim of the Seder deal with this Inyan. So it shows how it's all one Inyan. The idea of breaking Paroi, leading us into the Madrega of Midoyer into a higher generations, the generations of Mashiach's coming and what will come after. When the Rebbe said, began learning a Rashi, this week's Chazarah, not only did he learn a Rashi, but he also learned an Inyan which Rashi explains, which we will get to in a minute, and he learned an Inyan which Rashi doesn't explain, which obviously Rashi should elaborate more on, and Rashi doesn't. Before he did that, he says we spoke recently about the Rashi that Divrei Torah, aren't there enough chairs or benches to get more chairs for next week? We spoke last week in Va'era, we spoke to Rashi that Divrei Torah can be, Rashi quotes a Gemara, a Pasuk and later a Gemara, that Divrei Torah halekoi dvarai kaish, Divrei Torah halek fire, ukepatish yifoit etzel. And we learned the Rashi in Va'era, a little bit of turning of pages. We learned the Rashi in Va'era, I think it's Vav Tes. We spoke about it, the last two Farbrengens, where Rashi, at the end of the Rashi brings, Aloikoi Dvarai Ka'esh Niyum Hashem, Okapatish Yifoit Etzela, Mischalek Lekan Manitzutzis. So we asked the Shaila, actually, if Rashi is bringing an Inyan of Pshat, and Rashi is bringing an Inyan of the Rash, this is not the first time in Pashas Va'era where this Inyan is brought. Right away at the beginning of Chumash, Rashi already says, Hamikra Zeh Imed Arshen. So Rashi has to go out of his regular way. Rashi's regular Inyan is to learn Pshat. And Rashi has to come on to the Rash, so Rashi wants to comfort us by telling us that Divrei Torah can be learned in several ways. Rashi should have said this at the very beginning of Chumash. Rebbe says he spoke about this Inyan twice, and he only got one letter, one comment, from one Yochid Yuchid, from one single person who wrote to him. And this person wrote to the Rebbe that there's a Rashi in Vayishlach. In Vayishlach, it's Kapitel Lamed Gimel Pasuk Chav. Right before Chamishi. We have Chamashim, but I will find Chamashim minutes we can turn to it. Lamed Gimel Chav. And Rashi there says, Rashi's talking about Yankov, that Yankov Vayatzef Sham Mizbeach, that Yankov erected a Mizbeach, Vayikro Loi Keila Lekei Yisrael, and he referred to the Mizbeach as Keila Lekei Yisrael. We're going to need this pasuk for a few inyanim. Let us look at the very end of the Rashi. We'll go back to this Rashi later again. The Rebbe used this Rashi twice today. The very end of the Rashi. Rashi here uses a Pshat interpretation and a Drash interpretation. Lamed Gimel Chof. Rashi says, Divrei Torah kepater shifoitz etzel. Something very similar which we had in Va'era. Divrei Torah, just like a hammer cracks a stone, the same thing Divrei Torah. Mischalkim lakama taimim. Divrei Torah lets itself be interpreted into several interpretations. If we look at this Rashi here, and we'll look at the Rashi in Va'era, we see very strong differences. That's first. Prior to that, what the Rebbe was talking about today is, he said in the Farbrengen, that this is he said in the Farbrengen a few weeks ago, that this is the first time Rashi brings this quotation from Chazal. The Rebbe says he should have been bombarded with questions that this is a Rashi already in Vayishlach. Not only is it a Rashi in Vayishlach, but that Rashi in Vayishlach does not bring the beginning of the pasuk, of Aloikoi Dvorai Kaish, which Rashi in Ve'era does. Rashi in Vayishlach uses the expression Divrei Torah Mischalkim Lekama Taimim. Divrei Torah lets itself be explained into various reasons, while Rashi in Ve'era uses the expression Divrei Mischalek Lekama Netzutzes. It lets itself be, it turns into different sparks. So, actually Rashi is trying to bring out the same thought, in Pashtustik, and we see that Rashi is using completely different expressions. The Rebbe says he expected much correspondence, expected many people should write to him, why did he discussed this inyan so at length, and he discussed this inyan at two occasions, at two Farbrengens, and why didn't anybody write him a little note to comment that this inyan is already discussed in the Friedike Rashi? You see, the Rebbe's still is always, if Rashi is learning Chumash, Rashi has to tell us in the inyan the very first time the inyan is negated. So if Rashi already tells us this inyan, that Divrei Torah are explained in several Eifanim, then so Rashi said it. Now Rashi is saying it again in Ve'era, and Rashi is quoting the Chazal differently. So we must say that there's some sort of reason for it. But the Rebbe says, why didn't anybody ask him? Only one person out of all the people that are hearing the Farbrengen asked him this question. The Rebbe was very, very hurt by it. And he says, on one hand, he takes away time from people on Shabbos. And these people could stay home Shabbos and really enjoy Shina b'Shabbos Tainu. Sleeping on Shabbos is a pleasure which abbreviates Shabbos. He says they could spend the Shabbos afternoon with the family, and it's not or even learn at home. And he says what he does is he's taking the people away from enjoying the pleasantness of Shabbos. Not only that, the people have to come here and they have to sit in a stupenish, and they have to, and he says they miss out on their Shabbos meal. They have to cut. They can't finish the kugel. They can't finish the tzom. He says because we finished davening late, and by the time they have to come back to the Farbrengen, and it's cold outside, and it's glitching, it's slippery outside, and he says the person has to sit at the Farbrengen. He says it's a Mesiras Nefesh, which is real Mesiras Nefesh from people. They sit on one hand, he says, they sit at the Farbrengen, and everybody wants to get a good seat, a good place to sit at the Farbrengen, and they try at the Farbrengen to clap in a way to satisfy me, the Rebbe said. And at the same time, taking all this in consideration, which is they're giving up so much pleasure, and they're giving up so much enjoyment of Shabbos, what he would really want is that they should really listen to what he talks also. And if people would listen to the Farbrengen, then they would definitely come up with this question. So it's obviously, he says, it's only a Mesiras Nefesh, it's only a sacrifice on the end of not being with the families and shtutin zechir and all that, but the other end of really listening to the Divrei Torah, listening to what he's explaining, he says that's lacking. And he's concerned about it, because again, you see, the Rebbe wants very strongly, if anybody has any question in his inyanim, which the Rebbe explains in the Farbrengen, how busy the Rebbe's schedule is, he appreciates comments on the Sichos. And he says if he didn't hear from it only from one person, he's disturbed about it. Now let's go back to the Rashi. So this the Rebbe mentioned bypassing. Then the Rebbe spoke in this week's Seder, Pashas B'Shalach. We have after the Shira.
What was the answer?
He didn't answer. He just alerted to the question. He says, "Why didn't more people alert to this question?" After the Shira, we find Vatikach Miriam Hanaviyah. Miriam, the Neviah, the prophet, Achois Aaron, the sister of Aaron, she took a chatoif biyoda. She took a drum in her hand. And the pasuk continues, Vatetzena kol hanoshem acher, in Pashas B'Shalach, Kapitel Tesvav Pasuk Chok. And all the women followed her, besupim ubemchaylos. And Miriam, in behalf of all the Neshei Yisrael, Tesvav, right. Vatan lahem Miriam, then Chafalef, Miriam responded and said, Shiru Hashem, sing to the Rebishter ki go, sus v'roich v'rom avayom. In other words, prior to this we have the Yidden saying Shira, now the male saying Shira rather, now we have the female also expressing gratitude and thanks to the Rebishter for the great miracles which the Rebishter performed. Let's look into Rashi on Pasuk Chof. Es ha-toif, what means toif? So Rashi says, Klei shel minei zemer. It's some sort of a musical instrument. Then Rashi goes ahead, Besupim ubimchoylus. Rashi says, Muftochos hoyu, tzidkoniyus shebedoich, the tzidkoniyus in that generation were confident, Sha'HaKadosh Baruch Hu oiseh lehem nisim, that the Rebishter would do miracles with them. And that's why Hoitziyu tupim in Mitzrayim. And that's why they took out drums with them out of Mitzrayim. This is what Rashi comes. The original source of this Rashi is a Mechilta. Again, Mechilta is not Pshat. So if we will look into Mechilta and we will look into Rashi, we will see that there are differences between Rashi and Mechilta. Actually, what Rashi is bothered with here, how is it that all the women in that generation, they left Mitzrayim, and each one had a drum with them, or a musical instrument which is taif, and a taif which lets itself be translated would mean a drum, meaning every Jewish woman had a drum with her. Rabbi says we find another inyan. When the Yidden had to make the Mishkan. So the Yidden had to construct the Mishkan in the Midbar. So the Yidden had wood with it. So Rashi over there comments, where did the Yidden get wood in the Midbar? So Rashi gives a whole explanation that Yankov Avinu brought him down into Mitzrayim, the Erez. These type of trees, this type of wood which the Yidden would need for the Mishkan. And the Yidden took it out of Mitzrayim with Melis. So the Rebbe asked, that's an inyan which naturally requires explanation. If the Yidden are traveling, wandering in the Midbar, how do they come to have lumber? So Mamela, Rashi gives us a source where the Yidden got their lumber from. However, here the Yidden had a drum. The Pshat a drum. Drum is the Pshat. It's something which is used in many homes. Many homes have instruments which are used at occasions. At various occasions, an instrument is used in a home. Sometimes singing is done. Sometimes playing is done. Rabbi says in Mitzrayim, the Yidden were Mekayim. There were chasanas in Mitzrayim. There's a medrash that describes how Miriam danced at her own wedding. He says he doesn't know if there was the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben yet in Mitzrayim. This mitzvah of Pidyon Haben came later, but there were definitely many festive occasions during all the years the Yidden lived in Mitzrayim. During all the years they lived in Mitzrayim, they definitely had opportunities to use various musical instruments. Memela now that the Yidden left Mitzrayim, so they took along all of their belongings with them. So what's the kasha? How they had drums? How did they have drums? They had drums because they took out all of their belongings, but remember, they took out this as well. And in the kasha, the Rebbe learns that what they send up, Kol HaNoshim Acharai, stress this. The Taka says all the women went out, but all mustn't necessarily mean mamish that each and every woman had a drum. They all joined in the joy and the express of singing and dancing. However, it means a large percentage of them Taka had the musical instrument. And Mela, what kind of kasha is it how they had it? But Rashi tells us the whole explanation that these Tzidkoniyos of that generation were confident that the Rebishter would perform miracles. Mela, they took drums with them. They took drums because they took all of their belongings. Mela, once they took all of their belongings, they had the drums with them as well. Yeah, the Rebbe went off. He says that in homes, he says, singing is a practice, or sometimes music is a practice. When is singing a practice? The Rebbe says that it's an old custom by Yidden. But when a child falls asleep, a child is usually rocked to bed with the famous nigunim, which its originality, he says, are from Noshim Tzidkoni, is from previous generations, to sing to a child how the greatness of Torah. That Torah is the best Torah is the best commodity. Torah is better, faroshin kis a mandla, even better than almonds and raisins. It's a very famous expression. And the Rebbe says this is what brings into a child the best love for Torah and Yiddishkeit. And this, he says, is the best education a child could ever get. He says, not only does people believe that to raise a child, very sanitary is very important. All the child would see in front of him, the infant would see, is the doctor dressed in white, or the nurse dressed in white. And how parents try to be as sanitary as possible. But he says this is only worrying for the physical health of the child. However, if you worry for the spiritual health of the child, this singing at a child's crib or carriage, wherever a child is put to sleep, to sing to the infant, the greatness and instill into a child the greatness of Torah and Allah for Torah is of utmost importance. Here the Rebbe Chila, Simin Yafa Rabbanim. The Gemara says that when a child is born in the family, when a daughter is born first in the family, the Gemara says, it's a good sign for the following children, for the following boys. And there are many interpretations on the Gemara. The Rebbe says, Pashut Pshat. The Rebbe says, one of the interpretations is as follows. Bas Tchila, when there's an older daughter in the house, the daughter has to be raised. Part of educating the daughter is to raise her and educate her that she should help out the mother with the younger children. The Mela, when a Jewish daughter is raised, from her early childhood on, that she has to help out the mother with taking care of the kids, this instills a love into the daughter and the importance of the wichtigkeit of Kind. And here the Rebbe elaborated. He says, the mother could act several different ways. So if the mother would act that she has to dress up different and go running around shopping, and he says that the mother should pick up a dress different than the neighbor's dress, different than Shcheino Migoras Beisa is using the expression of the pasuk. And she says furthermore, she's going to instill all this in Kedusha. She's going to instill all this in Kedusha because Al Pi Kedusha she has to look clean and she has to look nice and she wants to be influential and she wants to be a career woman. How the Rebbe expressed himself. Well, why does she want to be so? Not chas v'chalila strange men, but dark in the eyes of her own husband. The Rebbe continued. If a woman portrays such kind of an attitude, that her whole union is to run around shopping and clothing and so forth, it says even if she would put it into a format of Kedusha, which can also be done, he says, the Rebbe says, but there's a Chassidim, it says that one shouldn't lend and give money for tzedakah. Give money for tzedakah, you give your own money. If you could afford, you give money for tzedakah. Borrow. One shouldn't borrow money to give for tzedakah. Mamela, this woman says to herself she wants to help her husband. She wants to help her husband give tzedakah. Mamela, how does she help her husband giving tzedakah? She will go out and get a good position. How can she get a good position? This is all if she will dress more proper, she will look younger and so forth. She says if she will come into a place where she's looking for employment, and at that place she's going to say that she's the mother of Yudbei Shifta Yisrael, that she has 12 Shvatim at home, then in all probability she wouldn't get the job. And then what the Rebbe says, she means Kedusha, she means perfect. She means to help her husband give tzedakah. She wants to help her husband pay the salimut. She wants to give money for the schools where her children go to, where their children go to. And maybe the Rebbe says, mitzad all these reasons, she feels that she does not want a big family. And Mamela, she instills this type of attitude into her daughters as well. This is what the Gemara says. Bas Tchila, Simin Yafa Labanim. When a mother has an older daughter, and she trains the older daughter properly, that's not to run around for shopping and for dressing and for all that's in the union. But what's the real union of a Yiddish Efroi? The real union of a Yiddish Efroi is raising a proper household. And she trains her daughters this way. This is Simin Yafa Labanim. This is a Simin Yafa for children to come. Not only for the children to come, it means already for the next generation. It means for the children to come of the generation of her daughter already. In other words, giving children a proper chinuch, training daughters properly, affects not only the training of the daughters, but this already means how the daughter is going to act when she will grow up. And when she will grow up and she will have to be a mother of children, she will look back to her mother as an example. So if her mother instilled in her the proper varamkeit, how to act with children, how to treat children, how to glad children and so forth, singing for children, Torah is the best Chazarah, that's very good. However, if her mother trains her that she shouldn't have anything to do with the infants, she should try and grow a woman with a career. Her union is to do homework, her union is to do other things, but to get involved with the younger children, chas v'chalila, that's not for her. The Rebbe views how the home should be that an older girl, in addition to doing homework, in addition to all her obligations, definitely has to take part in helping her mother raising the children. That's the pshat what the Gemara says, bas tchila simin yofa labanis. Here the Rebbe tied it in that tonight there's a Malava Malka from Machon Chana. And Machon Chana is the Women's Institute which is named after the Rebbe's mother. So the Rebbe says some may suspect that the reason I'm talking about this Malava Malka is because I have an Agiyah, because it's named after my mother. So I have an interest in it. And if it's raised after my mother, she's the mother that raised me. The Rebbe said, with all of my milas, with all of my advantages, and with all of my chesronos, with all of my disadvantages. She's the woman that raised me, and maybe I have an interest in this institution. So the Rebbe says, if you're going to suspect me so, the right hand wrote, it's true. Besides that, the Rebbe says, and above that, the reason I have an interest is not only the fact that the institution is named if there is more, but it's an institution that actually does the proper work, it does work in educating a Jewish girl about Israel.
Tape recorder.
About a proper future generation. Remember, the Rebbe asked that everybody should go to tonight's Malava Malka and take part in the Malava Malka of Machon Chana.